What's up, everybody? It's Brendan coming at you from Spartan Fitness with a video today on fitness prioritization. And I have to say it like that because sometimes enunciating isn't my best skill. There are several different aspects of fitness. If you want to break down like what fitness means technically, as far as having aspects of strength and speed and cardiovascular endurance and muscular endurance and mobility and flexibility. The list just goes on and on of what actually makes somebody physically fit. But when it comes down to it, it's lifestyle that has the most positive impact on your fitness, whether you're trying to get your first push-up or whether you're entering a powerlifting meet and you're benching 315 or anywhere in between there. There are certain things we have to consider when trying to increase our fitness. I think a lot of mistakes are made by people intuitively thinking that exercise should be the main priority, when the actuality is I personally have gotten to the best shape of my life by exercising less and by spending more time focusing on things that have more of an impact. And of course, this is on a scale of a timeline as well, because if you're new to exercise, you're going to get a lot more results in the very beginning, and then those results are going to taper off pretty rapidly. Now, that's a discussion for another video on why that happens and what type 2X muscle fibers are and how they're converted to fast twitch muscle fibers once they're destroyed immediately. And that's called newbie gains, but this isn't the talk for that. What I mean is, if you're relatively new to fitness or if you're new to making rapid gains, you could have been in fitness for years. You might have been consistently exercising for 10 years, but you're in the same place you were 7 years ago, and you made all your gains in the first 3 years. And I know 10 years is a long timeline to talk about exercise for people who are new, and you're just trying to get up the discipline to go into the gym 3 days a week, let alone stick it out for 10 years. But we have to talk about in terminology of duration of time, because that makes a huge difference in your fitness. Things aren't going to happen overnight. That's just the way it is. So let's go over this chart real quick. As you guys can see, I have things in a priority list on how impactful they're going to be for your overall fitness. And we're going to talk about this in chunks, and then I'm going to bring it all together for you. The most impactful thing you can do is have a negative calorie balance, and this is going to be for the vast majority of people. I'm talking to you guys like you guys are going to be the standard Americans. Like you're the average person in the country, and you're doing things well enough to stay alive, but you're not doing things well enough to thrive or increase your fitness. So that's why something like hydration can be put lower than calorie balance on a percentage of effectiveness, because you're already, as a standard American, drinking enough water to stay alive. You're already sleeping enough to function as you're functioning. I'm not saying it's very well, but you are functioning. And so that consideration needs to be had when looking at the chart. So your average American is overweight, is what I mean by that. So a negative calorie balance can be the most impactful thing. If you're trying to increase your fitness, you've got to consider that calisthenics and plyometrics are the epitome of fitness when combined with cardiovascular endurance. And that's your ability to move your own body with ease. I'm talking push-ups, pull-ups, squats. Those are the three big ones. And then running, let's say, is your endurance. So when considering push-ups, pull-ups, and squats, obviously you're going to do yourself a great service when it comes to reducing your overall fat mass on your body. And the only way to do that is a caloric deficit. There's really no other way to do that. And if you think you can create a caloric deficit through exercise, you're going to be surprised in the long term when you're exercising so much and not reducing your caloric intake that it just begins to break your body down. So it's never the right way to do things. And so for the average American, the biggest impact they can make when trying to increase their fitness, push-ups, pull-ups, squats, running, the most impactful thing they can do is to reduce their overall caloric intake. And so they're in a caloric deficit. When you consider that a caloric deficit is a super powerful tool to not only increase your fitness, but to improve your vitality and reduce your risk for future disease, it is, in my mind, 50% of the results. 50% of the results are going to come from your calorie balance, whether that's a surplus or a deficit. If it's a surplus, even a small surplus over time, is going to build to the fact that you will slowly gain weight. Creeping obesity is a major issue in the country right now, and that's just gaining a few pounds a year. A few pounds a year doesn't sound a lot, but if you plan on living to 65 and you're 20 right now, you do the math, and it's a pretty big deal. You could be 40 right now, and if you're planning on living to in your mid-80s, first of all, living to your mid-80s is going to take some work. Second of all, creeping obesity could come in right now and start to thwart your plans for the extent of your life. So that's why calorie balance is number one. Number two, which is about 20% of your results, is going to be based upon your macronutrient breakdown. And I say that because the priority that you should have to increase your protein intake is massive. If you were to be in a negative calorie balance, which is good for overall fat loss and longevity, the problem with that in the long term is that eventually your body's going to take amino acids from your skeletal muscle if you're always in a caloric deficit and never in a positive nitrogen balance. And just for some clarification, a positive nitrogen balance is a state that your body's in when you're eating more protein than what you need to maintain homeostasis, and then you can go into the process of anabolism, and that's where you're actually adding tissue to your skeletal frame in the form of muscle. So when we're talking about macro ratio makes up 20% of your overall results, because if you're in a caloric deficit, you do need to be in a positive nitrogen balance, because when your body starts removing tissue for the fuel that it needs to survive and to get through exercise, let's say, it's going to at some point remove muscle if you're not doing two things: eating enough protein to put you in a positive nitrogen balance, and doing enough resistance training to actually keep or build skeletal muscle. So those two things are important. Number three is tied with number four at 12%, and that's going to be hydration. Hydration is important. If you're an average American, you're living your life chronically dehydrated, and even if you're working out from time to time, chances are statistically you're working out dehydrated. Now, the problem with dehydration is that we are made up mostly of water. And when people say to me, it's hard to drink water, it doesn't compute with me, because the day's gonna pass anyway, and the time is gonna pass anyway. And if you spend that time being properly hydrated, it's gonna make the rest of the time more worthwhile. You're gonna have more mental clarity, your workouts are gonna be better, your sweating is gonna be more efficient, your respiration is gonna be more efficient when you're doing cardio training. And not only that, it is going to help keep your blood pressure under check and your blood sugar under check. It's gonna do a lot of things, because water is life, and without it, we just don't function properly. So when you combine your calorie balance with your macro ratio and with your hydration, there's one more thing we add in there to summarize your diet, which is going to be, did I do the math wrong? Is that going to be 84%? 50, 60, 70, 82, 83, 84. That is 84. So your supplements are included into your diet to bring this diet total up to 84% of your overall results. So we went over the importance of hydration. I could do another talk on hydration all alone, and what supplements are necessary for hydration and what's going to make that the most beneficial. Again, that's another talk. All I'm going to say is being properly hydrated supersedes almost everything else on the list as far as the things above that, right? Now, just to bring this point home a little bit, if your priority is working out over being hydrated, and what I mean by that is, if you're the kind of person that likes to work out in the early mornings and you're rolling out of bed and coming in to work out, the question you have to ask yourself, and I know this is a hard question, but is working out dehydrated better than not working out and being hydrated? And for longevity purposes, the answer is yes. And I know as a fitness coach, it's hard for somebody to say, maybe you should not exercise and work on being hydrated. But as somebody who's concerned with longevity, because the men in my family above me as my lineage have all died in their early 60s, it's important to mention that longevity is more important to me than anything else. I would love to be able to see my grandchildren. So hydration is super important for me for longevity. And I am not going to be the kind of person that rolls out of bed and exercises after a cup of coffee, which is dehydrating because it's a diuretic, and thinking that I'm going to do myself any benefit. This is a complicated subject, right?
Absolutely.
Because a lot of people put exercise over most of these other things. They will be in a caloric surplus. They will not eat enough protein. They will make sure that they're taking supplements at the same time as working out chronically dehydrated and never getting enough sleep. So when you're putting working out above everything else as far as the effectiveness list is concerned, it really doesn't make a lot of sense to me as a person that has the in-depth knowledge to know that that's not the right thing to do. Now, the confusing part about that is if you are chronically training dehydrated, you're still going to make some gains. And that's the confusing part is, oh, I've made so much progress. I've lost weight. I've built muscle. Yes, there is something called newbie gains, and the science behind that is pretty clear. Everybody, when they go up from baseline of what they were doing and they increase the baseline of their resistance training, of their cardiovascular training, they're going to make some pretty significant gains with consistency in the beginning, but that's going to fall off very sharply. How many people have we seen do that? You know,
Several.
It's countless. Yeah. It's countless people. Well, I'm not trying to discourage you from working out. I'm trying to say that if you can't work out hydrated most of the time, maybe change the time that you work out so you can be hydrated first, right? Would you ever say that working out comes above hydration or calorie balance or macro ratio?
Yeah, especially on a consistent basis.
It's funny to me, and this is the thing that's funny to me, but I don't blame the people, but how many people you know that put supplements and working out above everything else?
6 days a week of working out, they have every supplement in the book, and that's where they think their gains are coming from.
And we're talking about 2 and 4%. I mean, they're focusing on the 2 and 4% gain versus focusing on the big picture gains here that you can make. When I'm talking about supplements, though, what am I talking about? There's some really impactful supplements that I personally believe in and that I've personally just combed through clinical trials for years and years and years, and creatine is the number one. Anytime someone says to me that creatine is bad for you or that it's a steroid or that high schoolers shouldn't be taking it, with a statement like that, concludes in my mind that they shouldn't have an opinion on the matter, because it is the safest and the most effective supplement that anybody could possibly be taking. It's a mixture of 3 amino acids that are abundant in our diets, but especially abundant in meat. And if you have a problem eating meat, you can get a lot of benefit out of creatine. It's absolutely beneficial. And then electrolytes. Those are my top 2 supplements are creatine electrolytes. I know a lot of people who will take a dehydrating pre-workout with an ass load of caffeine and some amino acids that make their skin tingle but ultimately have no benefit. And then they'll go into the gym and work out hard for an hour and think that they're doing themselves some benefit. It's just not going to do much. Now let's move up the chart. We talked about diet, which is calorie balance, supplements, macro ratio, and hydration. Now we're going to talk about sleep. And this is the other thing too. It's like, what you might not realize is that you only grow and repair when you're sleeping. That's it. So to maintain function while awake, while your neurotransmitters are firing in your conscious mind, it just doesn't happen. You can get fat while you're awake, but you don't build muscle while you're awake. And a good way to illustrate this is we all know people, men specifically, maybe some women, who have a belt on and they wear a belt to work and then they gain weight around the belt, because we gain weight when we're awake. We don't gain weight when we're asleep. Our body turns excess calories into fat tissue while we're awake, and if you're having a belt, it just spills out over the belt, right? That's the Hank Hill body, essentially. And we all know people who work as a desk job and they sit, and while they're sitting, they're in a caloric surplus all day long. So their ass literally grows in the shape of a flat chair. And when they stand up, you can see that. I'm not trying to make anybody feel bad. I'm just trying to give some illustration to the point that you gain fat when you're awake and you gain muscle when you're sleeping. And so when you think about that, you need to be in a caloric deficit so that you can lose some fat, but you can only do that when you're awake. When you're asleep, hopefully you're fasting. Hopefully you're not waking up, sleepwalking and raiding the fridge, right? But you do only gain muscle when you're sleeping and you only gain fat when you're awake. So it's important to mention that. Sleep is the only time we build muscle, and muscle is the only thing that's going to improve your longevity for the most part. There's a spillover where with anabolic steroids in an abusive level, you can put on too much muscle, which isn't good for you either. But up right now, it's kind of up in the air if the drugs were the thing that's bad for you, or if the excess muscle is the thing that's bad for you. Either way, we know that naturally it's hard to put too much muscle on. And I would say next to impossible to be over muscled as a natural person, to the point where it would reduce your health and longevity. But as a woman, it's important for you to put on muscle because after the age of about 35, give or take a few years, you can no longer add calcium to your bone density from your diet. It doesn't happen. You can, after that, prevent so much of a breakdown from your bones because there's calcium leaching that happens after that age for your calcium needs if you don't have it in your diet up until you die after the age of about 35. But the only thing that prevents or slows that down is adding on skeletal muscle through resistance training. So it's very important that women get adequate sleep for that reason. And men, it's important for our hormone balance as well. And I can go into detail of the priorities of why it's important to sleep, and that could be a whole nother talk in and of itself as well. But for right now, I'll cap it at this. Sleep is going to be right around 12% of your overall results. And I'm talking about optimizing sleep. And when you start to optimize sleep and when you start to go to bed without a screen in the room and you are diligent about tracking your sleep and making sure you're getting adequate sleep, the rest of the things in your life start to fix themselves as well. Because if you're not sleeping because you're depressed or anxious or nervous or whatever the reason might be, maybe dialing in your sleep means getting some therapy and you can start to work those issues out as well. And then we have at the top of the list, working out. So what we know is that working out in and of itself without anything else is still super beneficial. It'll still reduce your all-cause mortality rate by anywhere from 15 to 20% as far as the research that I've read. But it's still not as impactful as the rest of the things for longevity. If you were to not work out but have a really active lifestyle, so there's non-exercise activity and then there's exercise activity. Exercise activity is regimented to be specifically as an exercise, where non-exercise activity is just like being active in the world, going for a hike, splitting firewood, mowing your lawn, perfect, yes, things like that. If you were to have an active life and not work out but do everything else on the list, you're gonna have better longevity, and we know that. But if you combine working out with a caloric deficit and an appropriate macro ratio, properly hydrated, sleeping, and optimizing your supplementation, it's going to be a whole new world. Now, the last thing to talk about on here is consistency, because consistency surrounds this entire thing. What we're talking about here is that none of the stuff on the inside matters unless you have a certain minimum of consistency. Meaning, if you're in a caloric deficit of 4 days a week, and then other 3 days a week you're in a surplus that blows the deficit, then the deficit at that point doesn't matter. If you only sleep in on the weekends, for example, or maybe only Sunday mornings, or whatever your schedule is to where you actually get 8 solid hours of sleep, it doesn't necessarily matter. It matters what you do most of the time, not sometimes. If you supplement here and there, it doesn't matter. But since supplements are already 2%, supplements don't matter unless everything else is taken care of. That's you gaining an extra 2%. But them by themselves as an isolated impact on your fitness is very small. It doesn't matter if you get protein 2 or 3 days a week. It matters if you get protein 7 days a week. And hydration is the same, sleep is the same. You can see where I'm going with this. Consistency is the thing that's all encompassing. It surrounds everything else, and it's the most important thing. So hopefully what you got out of this are a few things. Number one, I'm not experienced in detail with a lot of you viewers out there. I've been off of YouTube for a while, but I am experienced with all the members that we have here in our gym. And what I know is none of them have a problem exercising. They're here regularly. That's my goal, is to get people to come work out, right? So my people don't have a problem exercising. My people have a problem with the rest. And the thing about that is, I would love to be able to shift working out as your main priority to a secondary priority. So let's go over working out real quick. I don't want to get too in the weeds here, but I think this is important. There is cardiovascular training, there is muscular endurance training, and there is strength training, right? Well, of course, and there's stretching and mobility, right? So as far as that is concerned, let's say that you have a really good program, like the program that we have here. And in our HIT training, it's a 3-day-a-week schedule where we do all of those things. We have some mobility training, we have some strength training, we have some muscular endurance, and we have cardiovascular endurance. So our program is pretty in depth here. If you're doing our program 3 days a week, right, and you have another, let's say 4 hours a week that you're gonna choose what you're gonna do with that time, you can do cardiovascular training with that time on your own, because I've educated people on exactly how to do that. Not in as much detail as I would like, but I think I'm gonna get to that. But I've educated people on how to do cardiovascular training effectively. Now, if you have extra time in the week and you're getting your Monday, Wednesday, Friday training in, but you're not sleeping the amount you need to, you're not properly hydrated, you're eating more of macros that aren't gonna build muscles than macros that are, right? And you're in a caloric surplus, and then I'm gonna have to tell you, it makes no sense for you to do cardiovascular training. You could take that time and you could use it to make sure that you're gearing your life up for something that's way more impactful. Because this 4% working out covers all modalities of training. It doesn't matter how you're working out, it's only up to 4% of your overall results. So you gotta think about that. And this goes out to you guys specifically at my gym, not in the world of fitness out there. What I'm talking about is most people are prioritizing working out above nearly everything else. And it really is hard to watch people spin their wheels for years. You're sitting in one place just spinning your wheels. You're coming and you're doing it, and I'm proud of you, and you're doing some extras, and I'm proud of you for that, but it's not as impactful. This is weird coming from a fitness coach, right? Telling people they need to work out less, maybe. Mm-hmm. It is. It's weird.
Absolutely.
But it's true. It's like you've got to be able to prioritize your fitness. You've got to be able to prioritize the things that are meaningful and impactful in a list of what's going to be more impactful to least impactful. You've watched me train way less over the last couple of years and get way better results, because if I'm getting adequate protein on a daily basis, I don't have to train as much. I'm going to grow from those workouts because my sleep is in check. I'm going to have better mental clarity because I'm hydrated. You know what I mean?
I do, and I think that's a super important point, that the fitness industry is filled with a bunch of lies. It's filled with a bunch of misunderstanding, miscommunication. Supplements that's what makes the money. So
right.
A lot of fitness professionals do put those supplements way up here as the way to get the results that you want. And so there is a lot of weeds when it comes to being in this industry, and something that's always been really important to you is like having that moral compass and really showing people what actually works.
The truth, yeah.
Even if that means as a gym owner, you're telling people work out less.
Right.
You know, and our whole goal is to get people here, but we want to get people here in the right way.
For sure, absolutely. And I'm gonna just go on something you said here. Most of the fitness industry is cutting through weeds. It really is. If I sat down maybe with a sheet and like did hashes for every time it happened, I could maybe count it. But as of right now, I can't count how many people come up to me a week and say, what do you think about celery juice, right? Or what do you think about dark cherry extract? Or what do you think about beet fiber?
Or a detox, or whatever it might be.
Yes, and that's the industry trying to sell you shit that you don't need. Unfortunately, that's just the way it is. The money's not made for me telling you to stay home and cook meat. You know what I mean? The money's made for me selling you shit. So I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm trying to give you information on what you need to improve your fitness, on how to prioritize that. So hopefully that's been impactful. If you have any questions, you can always ask me those questions and I'll try to get them answered for you. But thanks for watching.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we'll see you guys next time.